during this time. We're all ready for outdoor activities, or sunshine at least, and here it is raining. So welcome to Wednesday Study Hall. Today, Peter Marks will be leading us through the tasting of three sparkling wines. So I think it's going to be a really great and informative tasting exercise and tutorial and walkthrough. So without further ado, let me bring Peter here on screen. Welcome, Peter.
Welcome. This is a wonderful day, even though it's raining. It's a perfect day to drink sparkling wines. So today we're going to enjoy three different types of sparkling wines that are all made in the traditional method, but they come from three different countries. So at the end, I'll go through my notes for each of the three wines. And then at the end, I'm going to give you some options of what the regions will possibly be for these three wines. And if you listen carefully, I think you can correctly guess where these wines come from. So our first wine today is class number one. And I'm going to be using the WSET systematic approach. I'm talking at any level, but probably more at the level 3, using their systematic approach to tasting. And when I look at this wine, class number one, the appearance appears to be a pale lemon color with sort of a medium intense nose. I would call it developing, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But I get some green blossom, some green apple, maybe a little bit of a yellow apple, pear, lemon citrus. And there is a little bit of the traditional method autolytic notes, that is from the aging of the lees. So for example, I'm picking up a little bit of a biscuit, a slight pastry character, maybe almost like a fresh croissant. I wish I was in Paris right now, drinking champagne and having a croissant. A little bit of cream as well, and maybe a hint of a little bit of almond. And that's what I was suggesting, that I said before when I called this developing, because most of the notes I've talked about are primary fruit. Then I got a little bit of that autolytic character, the biscuit and the light pastry. But then almond is what we call a tertiary note. So that's kind of a little bit of a bottle age character, or something that comes with aging the wine. So it smells really nice and delicious, though, too. So let's see how this one tastes. On the palate, it's dry. You know, if I were marking this, I could say it could be classified as off-dry. There's some sweetness, and as you know, most sparkling wines have a little bit of residual sugar, which is what they call the dosage. And often that's to give really good balance to the wine. If you don't have enough, if you have a high amount of acid and no sugar, the wines can be too tart and too acidic. So a lot of high acid sparkling wines will typically have a little bit of residual sugar to soften that acidity. And I would say, as a person judging this wine, it's right on the cusp between dry and off dry. That said, my mouth is watering like a fire hose. And I'm still watering. I'm swallowing because I'm watering. And that's what I would classify as high acid. Alcohol seems to be medium. Body's about medium plus, just a little bit more than medium. You know, for me, a medium bodied wine would be approximately like 2% milk. And it's just a little bit higher than that, just a little bit more fullness on the palate. The definition of the mousse, sometimes when you're talking about sparkling wines with level 3, you can classify it and describe the texture of the mousse. And for this, I would call it a creamy mousse. Yeah, it's got a nice little creaminess to it, which to me indicates that this has spent some time on the dead yeast cells. And what happens over time when you're aging the wine during that secondary fermentation, after the yeast die, the longer you age on the dead yeast cells, the more of those autolytic characters, the bread dough, the toast, and things like that. But also the bubbles become more finely integrated into the wine. Wines that are not aged very long tend to have bubbles that are a little bit more on the coarse side. So I think this wine has some good aging on the lees, not only due to the toasty character or the biscuit character that I get, but also from the nice creamy mousse. And then the finish is about medium plus, and flavors are consistent with what I found on the nose. there's a little bit more of a slight candied apple note that I get here. So a little bit of a riper fruit character that I didn't perceive on the nose. So similar flavors that other than that slight candy note. And again, medium plus finish. I would say conclusions. One of the things we do is we count the 4 different measurements for balance, length, intensity, and complexity. This wine is really well balanced. It's got medium plus intensity, so I give it a check mark there. It came up a little short on the finish. It wasn't long. It was only medium plus, so can't give it a mark there. But I think it has pretty good complexity. I'm kind of right on the fence about that too. So if somebody said you only had 2 marks, a mark for balance and a mark for intensity, that would be good. But if you consider the complexity to be a positive, then that would be 3 marks, and that would classify it as very good. And then finally, suitability for drinking. I think this is a wine that you should drink now and is probably not suitable for aging. And the reason I say that is part of that candied fruit that came through. It just seems like this wine is a little bit more upfront, and it's showing more fruit character. And probably that fruit character, while it's attractive now, I'm not convinced that it's going to be something that's going to improve in the bottom. So I like it just where it is now. I think it might start to sort of fade and become a little less interesting with some time in the bottom. So there's a summary of my notes again for wine number 1. And again, later on, I'll give you 6 options for where it comes from. And then you can decide what specific wine this one might be. Now I'm going to move on to wine number 2. And as I look at this wine, it appears to have a little bit more intensity. So I'm going to call that a medium intense compared to the first wine, which was on the pale side. Medium lemon intensity. Yummy. The nose is a little bit more pronounced. I wouldn't say it's fully pronounced, but I would say medium plus and developing. I'm also getting quite a bit of different aromas in this particular sparkling wine. So first thing I notice is some honeysuckle. I get some apple, but not only green apple, but I get a little bit of red apple. And to me, that indicates a lot of times when I'm smelling sparkling wine or tasting it, if I get a green apple, that kind of pushes me towards the traditional white grape of Chardonnay. And if I get more of a red apple, it could be Pinot Noir or possibly Pinot Meunier. So that's one thing I'm thinking that already this is probably most likely made from some traditional varieties, as you would find in Champagne or other premium sparkling wine areas, but also using some white and red fruit. I get some lemon, I get some spice pear. The autolytic characters are more pronounced here. So I get bread dough, brioche, a little bit of toastiness, some cream, almond notes. I also get a little bit of a whetstone, so a little bit of a minerality, some mushrooms, and even a touch of honey. And that's, again, why I call it developing, because you have some of that mushroom note, also that honey character and the almond notes. Here we go. Give it a taste. You notice I'm not spitting. It's really good. Oh, a lot of time, and first thing I just want to say is that when a wine has great balance, it's always like a perfect sphere. And this wine, there's nothing out of place. I can tell you right now, it just has a wonderful integration of all the different components. So what are those? Sweetness is dry. Now, I think there is some sweetness in the wine, but I really don't pick it up. I think the acid, high, I'm mouth-watering. Alcohol, medium. Body, medium plus. So the body seems a little lighter than the previous wine. And I would say the mousse has even more delicacy. So it's creamy as well as delicate at the same time. So probably some really long aging on the lees. And the intensity, again, on the palate is medium plus with the similar flavors. Quite a bit of that autolytic character, the bread dough, the toast, and a nice brioche, like a fresh brioche bun in the morning. You don't have to drink coffee with that. You can drink champagne. It'd be a really nice pairing. And then finally, the finish is quite long. Really, I'm still tasting it. So this wine has all the four markers for quality. It has great balance. It has medium plus intensity, so we give it a mark there. It has long length, so we give it a mark there. And it has wonderful complexity. So overall, excellent quality. And I would love to see where this wine goes in a few years. With our WSET aging requirements, generally we look at a wine, whether it's drinkable now over the first or the next 3 years. And if it can go longer than 3 years, then that kind of is a wine that has a potential for aging, which I think this wine does. It really has some beautiful complexity. The flavors are still developing. And just because, through experience, having tasted older sparkling wines, a lot of times you get more of that mushroomy character and that unique sort of dried fruit that can be really, really good. And I think this wine can develop more of those flavors because it's already complex, and I think it'll just grow from there. All right, so there's wine number 2. And then finally, we have wine number 3. And this wine, as I look at it, we're going back to pale lemon. So similar to the first wine that I had in the appearance. Medium intense. It's also developing. So I do get some primary fruit. Kind of hard to pick out a lot of different characters, but I do get some apple, some pear, lemon. There's a little bit of a earthiness, but it's not a stony earthiness. It's almost like actually kind of reminds me of a rubber tire or rubber pencil eraser. And there is a little hint of yeast notes, slight toast, maybe just a little bit of a light toastiness. And there's also a kind of a marmalade character as well. And marmalade could be a tertiary note. So that's another reason why this would be classified as developing, because it does have some of that slightly dried fruit character. Okay, let's give it a taste. A lot different than the previous wine. I'm going to go and say off dry on this wine. This wine doesn't seem as dry as the previous two. And part of that reason is the next thing I'm going to talk about, which is the acidity. I'm watering, but not prolifically like I did on the other two wines. So I'm going to call this medium plus on the acidity. And let me go back and try it again. Alcohol's medium. And body's medium. Now, when I'm feeling the mousse on this wine, it's really a lot different than the other wines. This one is a little bit coarse. In fact, I'm also getting a little bitterness on the palate at the same time. So not as creamy, not as delicate as the other two wines. Intensity of the flavors, again, is medium and similar to what I found on the nose. And then the finish, that's medium too. So kind of medium all the way down pretty much, except for the acidity, which is medium plus. When I look at this wine, I'm thinking about those 4 markers for quality. It does seem to have balance. It doesn't have length. It doesn't have intensity because it was only medium. And I'm on the fence about complexities. I don't think it has a lot of complexity, but it does have some of the different clusters. So you can decide whether you think it's complex or not. But if you only say it's balanced, then that would be acceptable quality because it only has one thing that it hits the mark on. But if you felt there was some complexity, that would be 2 marks, and this would be considered a good wine. But because of the sort of simple nature of this wine, in fact, you might even call it simple, it has not enough acid to give it any aging potential. So I say drink now, not suitable for aging. So that's our 3 wines. And now I'm going to have Christian put up a little summary. I think you can see that. And if you look at the bottom of that summary, you'll notice that there are 6 various options for deciding where these wines come from. And again, the options, if you can't read it, because the print on my screen is a little small, but it's Australia from the Tasmanian island, just offside of the mainland of Australia, from Napa Valley in California, from Franciacorta in Italy. We have 2 options for France. One is Champagne, and the other one is the Loire Valley. where they do make traditional method sparkling wines. And then finally, last but not least, we have a option for Spain from Catalonia, or more specifically, the Penedès area, which is where about 99% of all Spanish sparkling wines come from, or Cava wines. So take a minute or two, see what you think. If there are any questions before you want to make your guess, Christian, if you want to see if we have questions before people decide, maybe that'll help them come up with their decision.
So we do have a question from Daniel. Is it possible for a wine to be developing and not suitable for aging at the same time?
Sure, yeah. And again, I'm using that period of about 3 years with the tasting of this last wine, and the first wine too. I think they are both fine to drink over the next 3 years. They do show some development, but they are not fully developed by any means. And at the same time, they don't have the fruit structure, or they don't have the acidity to really keep that wine fresh and keep it going or improving in the bottle. So you can have a wine that's just great as it is now, but it doesn't have the capacity to age, even though it's showing some development.
Great. Okay. So no questions.
Okay. So let me go back again, and while you're thinking, I'm going to go back and just share a little more detail about these wines. And actually, maybe I could tell you a big clue. You can look at the corks. Does that tell you anything? Oh, there's one right there that says, whoops, let me turn it around. Champagne. All right, which one is that though? Anyway, so back to the first wine. What I'm getting in this first wine, you notice that slightly, that candied fruit character. The body was a little bit medium plus. This had the most body of any of the 3 wines. I didn't pick up any minerality, any wet stone character. And it was dry, but maybe off dry. To me, that kind of gives a little bit of an impression of a sparkling wine that's from a very well-made producer. We have some nice autolytic character, but maybe more from the New World, because I'm lacking some of the more restrained, more cooler climate fruit aspects. And our only 2 options here for the New World would be California or Tasmania. And in Napa Valley compared to Tasmania, Napa Valley is going to be a little bit warmer compared to Tasmania. And actually, a lot of people will confuse Tasmania with Champagne because those areas have a similarity in the temperature. With that, I would probably push myself a little bit towards the Napa Valley, just if I was tasting this blind. The second wine, this one, as I mentioned, not only was the quality outstanding, but I did get some of that wet stone. I did get both the red fruit and the white fruit, the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir, or possibly Pinot Meunier. And when I say that, Pinot Meunier, for me, always has a certain type of mushroomy character. And I did get mushroom on this wine. The reason they use Pinot Meunier in Champagne, well, for a number of reasons. Number one, it buds late and it ripens early. So in a cool climate where you might have frost in the spring and you might have rain at harvest time, it's perfect grape for growing in that type of climate. But at the same time, when you make a wine with Pinot Meunier, it tends to produce a wine that has a lot more upfront fruitiness. And that upfront fruitiness is usually a sort of a mushroomy character. Chardonnay and Pinot Noir tend to be a little bit more restrained and more reserved in their youth. And it takes a little bottle age before those flavors really develop. And that's if you're looking at a wine that's more of a vintage dated Champagne, those typically are using exclusively Chardonnay and or Pinot. But the non-vintage brutes tend to be more using of the Pinot Meunier wine, or Pinot Meunier grape. And again, because of the quality, because of that mushroomy character, kind of just all overall sense of balance and just beautiful complexity, that kind of pushes me to a really high quality sparkling region in the Old World. And for me, that could be Champagne or Franciacorta. And the difference between those two, Franciacorta is just a little bit warmer. So I might expect maybe medium bodied there, and maybe some riper fruit characters, but this wine only, medium plus for Franciacorta. This one was only medium. So I'd kind of push this one towards Champagne. And then last but not least, the last wine, a real marker for me that I've always been able to pick out, if you are looking at a traditional Spanish cava, meaning the traditional grape varieties, which are Macabeo or Vieira, Xarel·lo, and Pettillada, those grapes tend to have good acidity, but not great acidity. Plus, the region is rather warm, and so this wine only has medium plus acidity. But that Xarel·lo grape often has that earthy, or what I often call a rubber eraser, or rubber tire note. So I'm thinking this might be a Cava wine, just from the acid balance and the aroma profile. So hopefully you've had a chance to figure out on your own. Let's show them the answer, shall we, Christian? And there we are. Number one is the Mum Napa Blanc de Blanc. That is all white grapes. Now, I looked up the technical notes on that. It's 80% Chardonnay and 20% Pinot Gris. The wine was aged for about 4 years on the yeast, and it has a residual sugar of about 9.5 grams per liter. And again, as I said, that's a little bit high for Brut, where I was picking up a little bit of the possible sweetness there, but still a very, very nice wine, and a great example of a New World style using the traditional method. Again, wine number two goes without saying, champagne is champagne. It's hard to replicate. And Louis Roederer is certainly one of the best producers. I was thinking about putting in the Roederer estate here, but that's taste from Mendocino, but it tastes too much like champagne. I didn't want to mess around with you guys too much today. But Louis Roederer from Champagne is making a really beautiful wine. This is 40% Chardonnay, 40% Pinot Noir, and 20% of that Pinot Meunier. And it, too, was aged about 3 to 4 years and has about 9 grams of sugar per liter. Now, it's about the same amount of sugar as the Mum, maybe a little bit less. But again, I think it's got more acidity, which gives it that really dry finish. And then finally, the third wine is a Cava from Spain. Cava is the term we use for a traditional wine that comes from Champagne. And that is a blend of the Xarel·lo grape, 50%, and then 25% Pettillada and 25% Macabeo. And it's only aged for about 12 months. So it doesn't have a lot of that autolytic character. As I mentioned, has a little bit of a light toastiness. But that's very typical for a nice, affordable wine. In fact, the Conquilla Cava is about $10 or $12. The Roederer, I think, suggested price is around $50, but you can find it, probably around $40 a bottle. And then the Mum Napa on their website retails for $24 a bottle. All right, so that is our lineup of sparkling wines for today, and I open it up to questions.
Great. We have one here from Jojo. From the visual, looking at the bubble directions movement, how does it indicate the quality of the wine? So do bubbles indicate anything about quality?
So do the bubbles indicate quality? It can, but here's the issue. The issue is the glasses. And my glasses, I put them in the dishwasher. I probably have some soap residue. I'm too lazy, to be honest, to hand wash these and steam dry them and all that sort of thing. But any type of residue in the glass will kill the bubbles. So, and every glass is different too. Therefore, you cannot judge a wine by the size or the persistence of the bubble. I try to pay more attention to how it feels on the palate. And that's something that you can still get a sense of the bubbles by feeling them, but looking at them is not always a definite clue as to the quality. But generally, the smaller the bubbles, or if you're tasting it, the creamier, the more integrated, the more delicate the mousse, that would indicate a higher quality wine. Whereas larger bubbles, maybe coarser bubbles, would typically push it more towards an average or medium quality wine.
Great. I think that was it as far as questions are concerned today.
Okay. Well, I will leave you with one of my favorite toasts from Madame Lily Boulanger. She was the proprietress of Champagne Boulanger in Champagne, France. And she has a great quote, which she said once, that I drink champagne when I'm happy and when I'm sad. Sometimes I drink it when I'm alone. And when I have company, I consider it obligatory. I trifle with it if I'm not hungry and drink it when I am. Otherwise, I never touch it unless I'm thirsty. So every time's a great time for sparkling wine, and particularly champagne, or any wine made in the traditional method. I hope you enjoyed our little tasting today. Be safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Peter. What a great tasting. A lot of fun and very informative. Hope everyone enjoyed it. Join us back here on Saturday at 11 o'clock, where we will be hosting another study hall session, this time an interview about Spain with a master of wine, an expert on Spanish wine. So make sure and join us here at 11 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time on Saturday. Thanks so much. Stay safe, as Peter says. Drink well, and we'll see you back here soon. Thanks so much.